Wooden planes, zero radar, total silence. Why the German military was terrified of the World War II's all-female night bombers.
If you love forgotten stories of powerful women, hit subscribe. I uncover a new one every week.
The German soldiers on the Eastern Front called it das Maschinengeräusch, the sound of a sewing machine. A soft, stuttering hum, high above the trenches, easy to miss until it stopped. The silence was the warning, because when the engine went quiet, that meant the aircraft was gliding, and somewhere above you, in the dark, a bomb was already falling. They never saw a face. They never saw a name. All they knew was that death arrived on wings made of plywood and canvas, flown by pilots. The Luftwaffe refused to believe we're women, until the wreckage told them otherwise. October 1941. The Wehrmacht stood less than 200 miles from Moscow. The Soviet Union was losing pilots faster than it could train them, and one aviator believed she knew where to find more. Marina Raskova was already a national hero, the first woman to receive the Hero of the Soviet Union medal for a record-breaking flight in Siberia. Now, she petitioned Stalin directly for something no Air Force on Earth had ever authorized. 3 fully female combat aviation regiments. Pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers. Every seat filled by a woman. Stalin agreed. Within weeks, over 400 women answered the call. University students, factory workers, some barely out of their teens. Trading textbooks and sewing machines for cockpits. The aircraft they were given was not a warplane. The PO-2 was a canvas and plywood crop duster, designed decades earlier for training and agricultural work. It carried no radio, no defensive guns, no ammo. It flew barely faster than a modern car. On paper, it was obsolete. In the hands of 588 Night Bomber Regiment, it became something the enemy had no answer for. The PO-2's greatest weakness became its deadliest weapon. It was slow enough and light enough that a pilot could cut the engine entirely and glide the final approach to targets in near total silence. German radar of the era wasn't built to track something moving that slowly. Its speed was often below the stall threshold of Luftwaffe fighters, which risked crashing themselves if they tried to match it. And in the dark, painted matte black against the night sky, it was nearly invisible until the bombs were falling already. Each crew of 2 flew as many as 8, sometimes 18 missions in a single night, landing, rearming by hand in the freezing dark and taking off again before dawn. There were no parachutes for most of the war. The extra weight caused too much lift. There was no cockpit heating in a country where winter temperatures fell to 30 below. Frostbite was as common injury as shrapnel. And still, after night, they went up. It was the Germans who gave them the name that outlived the war. Nachthexen, night witches. Some claim the stuttering idol of the PO-2's engine, just before its cut to glide, sounded like a witch's broom, sweeping through the dark. By the war's end, the regiment had flown more than 23,000 combat sorties. 23 of its pilots and navigators were awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest military honor. Nadezhda, popova, joined after her brother was killed and her hometown occupied. She would go on to fly more than 800 missions before the war's end, surviving a shoot-down, evading capture, and returning to the sky within days. Irina Stebrova logged the most sorties of any pilot in the regiment. Over 1,000 by war's end, flying missions from the icy Caucasus front to the outskirts of Berlin itself, and commanding them throughout was Yevdukia Beshanskaya, the only woman to lead a Soviet air regiment from the war's entire duration, without ever losing her post to a male officer, a rarity, even within a force built on wartime necessity. The cost was severe. 30 of the regiment's members were killed in action, many on nights, when a stalled engine or a stray searchlight left them exposed with nowhere to hide. Unlike most Soviet regiments, they flew without the shield of fighter escorts or return fire. Their only defense had always been the dark itself. German command initially refused to believe women were responsible for the losses. When the truth was confirmed, it was said that any pilot who shot down at a night watch was automatically awarded the Iron Cross recognition. However, grudging of an enemy they considered exceptionally dangerous. When the war ended, the women of the 588th were not included in the victory parade through Red Square. Officially, it was said their aircraft were too slow to fly in formation with the rest of the Air Force. Many returned to civilian life with little acknowledgement beyond their medals. Soviet post-war narratives, eager to return women to pre-war domestic roles, spoke little of what they had done in the sky. For decades, their stories survived mostly in the memories of the men who had feared them, and the women who have flown beside them, until historians decades later began to piece the record back together. Today, the wreck of a single PO2 sits preserved in a Russian museum, smaller up close than most people expect. It is hard to believe an aircraft that is fragile once carried the most feared bombing force on the Eastern Front was Greenland. History remembers speed, size, and steel. It rarely remembers a plywood crop duster flown by women in their 20s, cutting their engines and gliding into gunfire, because it was the only advantage they had. But soldiers who lay awake listening for a sound that wasn't there, they remembered. They gave them a name meant to frighten: the Night Witches. Wore it instead as a record of everything they survived to become. This is Forgotten Blades. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a review.